for ISN West Zone 2020. To deliver the oration, we have Dr. Jeremy Chapman with us. The session would be chaired by Dr. Bharat Shah and Dr. Shruti Tapiawala. Dr. Bharat Shah is Director Nephrology, Global Hospitals, Mumbai. He's been mentor to many nephrology fellows for National Board of Education. He has multiple national and international publications, and he is President ISN West Zone. Dr. Shruti Tapiawala, she is nephrologist at HN Reliance Foundation Hospital, Mumbai, and Global Hospitals, Mumbai. She is Secretary ISN West Zone and has special interest in transplant immunology. Over to the chairpersons.
Can I get to share the screen, please? Good evening, everyone, and I would like to welcome all of you to Dr. ACharya Oration. It is my proud pleasure to introduce everyone to this oration. Everyone knows Dr. ACharya, but it is my pleasant duty to introduce her and this oration. Dr. ACharya, affectionately known all over the country as Mother of Nephrology, started her illustrious medical career, completing her undergraduate and postgraduate studies at the prestigious St. G.S. Medical College and KEM Hospital, Mumbai. She dedicated herself completely to these institutions where she joined as a faculty and contributed immensely to the development of departments of medicine and nephrology. She ventured into the male-dominated world, and her entire journey was characterized by fearless and unflagging energy that ensured the establishment of a department that was a cynosure in the eyes of the world. Many of her students, trained and nurtured under her, have achieved positions of eminence. All her students stand to witness the care, love, and attention showered to them. For them, even those who are not fortunate to be her students, she would ever be a helping hand and a ear to listen. She contributed much to the development of nephrology in the state, the Western Zone, and the country. She developed the first dialysis and transplant facility in the Western India, and she was a vigorous advocate of deceased donor transplant in the country and the zone. She was also very active in prevention of kidney diseases, for which she organized various educational and screening programs through the National Kidney Foundation, India. She was the founder member of the Indian Society of Nephrology and the Indian Society of Organ Transplant, and served as a panelist president for both the societies. She was instrumental in bringing all renal healthcare professionals together by organizing the first ever conference called the Conference of Renal Healthcare Professionals, COREP, in 2012. This conference was highly applauded by the International Federation of Kidney Foundation. She was a great academician and had more than 250 publications in various national and international journals. She was an invited speaker and visiting professor to universities and medical schools both at home and abroad. She was instrumental in bringing the Indian nephrology to the world map. Even after her retirement, she continued to remain a great teacher and researcher, devoted herself wholeheartedly in the training of students of nephrology, encouraging them to conduct research. For all her contributions in the field of nephrology, she received numerous awards, including Lifetime Achievement Award from Indian Society of Nephrology and South Asia Region Pioneer Award from International Society of Nephrology. The nephrology community, and in particular the members of the West Zone chapter of the Indian Society of Nephrology, are indebted to her and have instituted this oration in her honor. Ever since 2006, various eminent professors of nephrology and nephrologists have been awarded this oration. And this year, the oration has been awarded to Dr. Jeremy Chapman. Now, I would request Dr. Bharat Shah to introduce Dr. Jeremy Chapman to the audience.
Hello, am I audible? Can you stop?
Yes, sir.
Can we stop sharing the screen?
Yeah, I'm trying to do that. Stop share. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Shruti. We all are very happy and feel honored to have with us Professor Jeremy Chapman to deliver Dr. ACharya Oration. As you know, I was also one of the fortunate ones to be Madam's students, and I had a lot to learn from her, not only as a student, but even after I passed out my nephrology and got into practice. I would not like to take a lot of time because we all are very keen to hear Professor Jeremy Chapman, who is the professor of clinical medicine at Westmead University in Sydney, in Australia. He made immense contribution in the field of transplantation, both in clinical medicine and in academic medicine. He has had several honors to his credit, and recently he was awarded Asia Pacific Society Nephrology Award. I would not like to take much time. I would just want to say that Professor Jeremy Chapman is well known to all of us in this country, all the nephrologists in this country. One of my students was also trained with him. And Jeremy, we are very happy that you accepted to deliver this oration in honor of my mentor, Dr. V. N. Acharya. And now over to you. Over to Professor Jeremy Chapman.
Thank you for the opportunity to visit you in India, and I'm very sad not to be with you, I have to say. My last but one trip in March was to India, and I was hoping that my next trip would also be to India, but things are keeping us apart, as we all know. I'm deeply honored to be invited to give the VN Acharya Oration for the Indian Society of Nephrology Western Zone. I have some disclosures, you know them already. I had the delight of knowing Dr. Acharya, not well, but from my visits over probably 30 years in which I visited India. I sought from her students, many of you in the audience I suspect, some views. And there are two shown here, and the author of these views will almost certainly be on the teleconference. And to him, I thank him for providing these thoughts about the mother of nephrology in India. She was a teacher of nephrology, but also an exponent of philosophy. She showed an unwillingness to accept a dichotomy between principle and practice. And this came as easily to her as it is difficult for us to put this same philosophy to practice today. She had my deep respect.
You are not attending the meeting.
Over the many years that I knew her. The good years and the difficult years for nephrology in India.
Yes, Dr. Prasad.
People were kind enough to send me many photographs of her, and here are a few. And I will pick one out later to be the hallmark of this oration. Starting in 1971 with the artificial kidney machines in the King Edward Memorial Hospital. Unstinting, continuous, determined, thoughtful, kind, impressive. These are all words that come easily to mind as we recall her. So what I would like to do as an outsider to India, but as I hope a friend of India and an observer of the prevention and treatment of chronic kidney disease in your amazing country, since I first visited, probably 1977 was my first visit. And I want to identify for you some of the things that I think might be important for you to take away and to consider. And of course, as always, when we talk about any chronic disease, awareness, prevention, treatment, and then for us, dialysis, donation, and transplantation. Critical issues, not to be forgotten in a headlong rush for transplantation, which of course will be a focus of my talk. I want to leave you with one message, and I will leave it with you now, but I will repeat it. The key to the problems and the issues that you face is, in my humble opinion, as an outsider, data. Data is the key to all of these things, to awareness, to prevention, to treatment, to dialysis, to donation, to transplantation. Data. This is a WHO chart of the disability adjusted life years from disease, from various non-communicable diseases, and here from chronic kidney disease in the year 2017. Doesn't change that much from year to year. And you see the map of India drawn there, just a little bit worse than the mean of those countries. There are worse, with more kidney disease than you have, and there are better, but you know that. So you sit somewhere in the middle, but of course numerically hugely impacted. How hugely impacted? Well, we can measure that. Let's blur that picture and look at a little different focus of the problem. Looking now at the Global Burden of Disease study, also from 2017, systematic analysis, published in the Lancet quite recently. The world, total affected with chronic kidney disease, 697 million, nearly 700 million. India, 115 million. And when you age adjust it, because India is slightly younger than the average, India has a slightly higher age adjusted burden of chronic kidney disease. Between 1990 and 2017, as best can be described, the world has increased the burden by 1.2%, and you by 8%. Large, a very significant proportion of the global burden, and growing 4 times as fast, 5 times as fast. Global deaths, 1.2 million. Yours, 223,000. Again, a massive component. I gave a lecture in Mumbai with Dr. ACharya, I think in the chair at the time, and I predicted that you would become the global epicenter of transplantation, that your numbers would rise, and that you would indeed become one of the top 2 or 3 global powers in the field. It's coming. The opportunity is there. Your treatment of chronic kidney disease by transplantation is an important component for reasons we'll see in a moment. And again, your percent change in deaths has risen twice as fast as the global rate of death. So I think I can reasonably conclude that you have a problem, that you know you have a problem, that it is a massive problem, the one that Dr. Acharya started on so many years ago to tackle. And what have you got to tackle it with? And this, of course, you know, but it's instructive to put it into numbers. Your current health expenditure per capita in US dollars was 2017. $69. That represents 4% of the gross domestic product. So it's a reasonable amount of money in total, but your population, of course, is so large. Now the breakup of where that money comes from. General government health expenditure, in other words, from taxes, 27%. Domestic private health expenditure, the private pocket, 72%. And of that, all but 10% is out-of-pocket expenditures. In other words, very little insurance capacity in the country. These are well known to you. I repeat them here to demonstrate they're well known to me too, in case you think he's disconnected from the realities that you face. I know this reality. I can compare it for you with Australia. $5,332 per capita, 9% of our GDP. Through taxes, 70% comes through private health expenditure, and quite a lot of that through health insurance. And out-of-pocket expenditure represents only 18%. So we have a massively different scenario to you. Your care is almost all from the private. The answer is it is not manageable within these disease parameters, but there are some things that can be done. So what is the result of that health expenditure? And you will see here that your life expectancy in light green is limited by the lack of expenditure, by your total amount of gross domestic product, and the way in which much of your population doesn't have access to some of the higher intensity and higher cost therapies, such as those for renal disease. So here's some WHO indicators. What are you good at? Vaccination. Not a pneumococcal vaccination, but other vaccinations. And if I was in your ministry, that's where I would put most of my money too. Interesting in here, the huge burden that healthcare plays on the household expenditures. 17% of your households, 17%, nearly 1 in 5, spend more than 10% of the total household expenditure or income on health. And 4% spend 25% or more. They're crippling numbers for individuals, as you know, and you are on the sharp end. And if you look at some of your national targets, and you look at some of the national measures relevant to chronic kidney disease, raised blood pressure. 1/4 of your adults over the age of 18 are hypertensive. 8% have raised blood sugar. You're doing pretty well on obesity. I wouldn't like to put the Australian data up there. We're at 50% obesity. So some things you're good at, and others are a major concern. And if you look at the bottom of the graph, you will see the trends for obesity and raised blood pressure are not in the right direction. Your diabetes, as you know, is getting worse. Your blood pressure, as you know, is going untreated. And your chronic kidney disease that results from this is very substantial. So you have a challenge. And how are you meeting that challenge? And how can data help? So I've shown you some data which actually just demonstrates how hard your particular job is to manage the issues of chronic kidney disease in India. And of course, to manage it with some prevention, with management of hypertension and diabetes. And I know that some of your program is on that subject. And some treatment, but the treatment is quite restricted to a population that can afford it, albeit a larger population than I have in Australia that could afford that treatment. It's still only a fraction of the population you have to treat. And so here you look at the Human Development Index, a measure that the UN development agencies use to classify countries. It's an interesting classifier. It's got all sorts of different indexes built into it, including health, longevity, prosperity, democracy, and education indicators. There's a couple of things that you can take from this slide. The first is even the very high, the very wealthy countries have really quite massive differences in the total number of kidney transplants that they perform per million population. Not all explained. And in fact, there are some here at the bottom that have extremely low transplantation rates. Not well explained. And India. Medium HDI. We've looked at some of your indicators of prosperity already. And a small but meaningful proportion of total kidney transplants per million population. Important not to be at the baseline zero. You have lifted, and of course you've lifted with doing many treatments. And so you've become very good at what you do. It's just you have such a big population to manage. So if we look across the world, 16 transplants performed an hour, 380 a day, 140,000 transplants performed in 2017. And here you see the data for the individual countries. And you see living donors and deceased donors. And you can see a principle that as you get into lower numbers per million population, the predominant source of transplantation is from the living donor. And as you get into higher total transplant numbers, the majority come from deceased donors. It's important to understand how each country manages these problems and manages this balance between the two forms of donation. And we'll come to talk about that in a moment. If you look at total solid organ transplants here, you see India again, essentially kidney and liver transplantation coming together, still keep you numerically underserving your population more than many countries in the world. Dr. Acharya took it from a blank page with all of you, took it from white to light green. You have a way to go, as we do. It's a challenge, not one to be ignored. And here's your deceased donor rate. Right at the bottom, if you didn't see it, 773 donors in 2017. And I'm sure that that is a disappointing number to you. Interesting data globally here showing the balance between male and female recipients of kidney transplants, with globally 63% of recipients being male for 37% female. Unfortunately, India has no data. You're not alone on that. Australia's not on that chart either, though we do know the proportions. If you have data, you can start to do something about it. You can start to see the picture beyond your immediate clinic. And without that, it's very hard to have government take policy decisions and you to take treatment decisions which advance the overall national capacity. So here are some examples of national reform programs in organ donation. Spain, Croatia, Portugal, UK, and Australia. And they've all been adjusted to the year that the national reform agenda started. And you can see that if you have a concerted, determined, national attempt to change the deceased donation rate, it can be done. It also needs money. And you will say that is the thing that stops us, but I can tell you it's not actually the most impeding problem. Understanding your data, utilizing your data, interpreting your data for your national issues is what we've all had to do to change our organ donation rate. We've gone up 124% over 10 years in total number of donors, and that's 93% increase in total number of transplants. And we thought we didn't have enough. We thought we didn't have any more donors available to us back in the early 2000s, 2000 to 2007, 8. There was doubt as to whether we would actually have any more donors in the country. Nobody could find them, but they were there. And they were there as we found the data. We were there as we examined the influences. If the person asking about organ donation to the family of a deceased person, a brain dead person, has been trained to do it, we get 75% consent rate. And if they're asked, but not by somebody who is not trained, we're going to get 45%. None of you will be surprised to learn that training makes a difference to performance. One of the things that India is absolutely best at, training people properly. This is a task for India. Now, we looked at our data in great detail. We knew we had 80,000 deaths. They're recorded, they're known. What we didn't know was how many potential organ donors we had. So we had to examine the medical records of every person who died in a hospital in the country. 1,309 potential organ donors. And we sought requests for donation in 1,200, and we got consent in 760, and we proceeded with about 550 donors. Understanding that data, understanding the cascade of where we miss donors is absolutely critical to making a difference. A massive difference between measuring the creatinine and staring at a patient and trying to guess it. You must do the same thing in organ donation. And here is a dashboard. Every month, every organ procurement organization has a dashboard reporting how well it's going, what it's doing, how successful it is, how much it's missed, what its consent results are. And it feeds back to every hospital. Data-driven performance influences your colleagues in intensive care units just as it influences you. So my conclusion is that each country is in a different phase of organ donation. And the metrics that you use in each country must be tailored to meet the needs of that country. But two things are absolutely universal: the need to collect and analyze the data, and I would propose to you the definitions used. When is a donor a donor? When is a transplant a transplant? When is a potential donor a potential donor? All these data are available to you in the global literature, but if you don't use the definitions and determine to collect and analyze the data, you won't get much progress. But living donation, a major success. Here you know the picture, the first successful twin living donor transplant, but it was the first successful one. What happened to the donor? Many of you will know. Here he is as a young man. Here he is as an old man at a transplant games receiving a medal. Ronald Herrick died at the age of 84, 56 years and 3 days after his donation. What did he die of? He withdrew from dialysis. He had kidney failure in the last few years of his life. There's a responsibility for us. Now, you will know the continuous and real clamour about organ trafficking, and you will know about the impact that it has in your own country, and I'm not going to. You yourselves demonstrated that these futile views that, oh, allowing some poor person to get money for his kidney is good for the poor person. You proved that it wasn't true. Certainly not in India. These were convenient fictions permitting a commercial traffic. And you will know these pictures. The far right hand one from Gurgaon in Delhi. Pictures from 3 different countries here with the same common feature that the poor need cash and see a way to get it and head for it. And you will be as familiar as I am with the problems that people lie about their medical history. They'll use other people's urine for tests if theirs is not perfect. They'll take antihypertensives to have their blood pressure right for the medical exams. And they are high risk for disease transmission because of the hidden information. And you live with this every day, I know. And you have a system to protect the individuals. How successful is it? How good is your data? I think you must look to yourself to understand that. Here we have US data on the cumulative incidence of chronic kidney disease in living donors. 30 per 10,000 over 15 years. It's perfectly possible to increase chronic kidney disease through living donation. And I point to the left, the two people standing there. One is the brother of a potential recipient, and the other is the monk that the donor hoped would replace him donating. Shocking, astonishing, disturbing that a monastery would consider sending their young monks to provide a kidney, not for monetary return to the monk, but to the monastery. Not in your country, but I have seen it in 2 countries very close to your borders. And I know that this pressure for living organ donation from unrelated continues in your country and continues and is in your mind every time you evaluate a donor. I want to leave you on this subject with this picture, which you may have seen from me before. Stare at it long enough and you see the devil and the angel intertwined, the good and the bad of organ transplantation inextricably intertwined. Do not get to believe that you only see the angel. Do not get to believe that you only see the devil. But understand that the definition of the two is clear, both in the professional environment through the Declaration of Istanbul and through the governmental national channels with the World Health Organization and their guiding principles. You do have principles that you can reach out to keep you with the angel and avoid the devil. And on many conversations with Dr. Acharya on this subject, it is only through constant inquiry, constant concern, constant consideration that you will be able to retain your own professional integrity in the treatment of the patients that you have. The data will help you with your patients. This is data that shows from the point of waitlisting for a kidney transplant in Australia, what is your chance of getting a living transplant before a deceased donor, dying before your transplant, or receiving a deceased donor transplant. It's good for the public to be able to see data. And you have to be careful about the data that you present, because physicians and patients do worry about quite different things. And it's actually quite interesting when you ask a stack of patients and their families, what are they most worried about after a transplant? And you'll see at the top of that whiteboard is kidney function and kidney rejection. It beats death. They're more worried about getting cancer than dying. Dying is quite low on the list of concerns for the patient. Very interesting. You need to ask them about it. So what are we able to achieve now that we couldn't before? And this shows you the chart of development of transplantation over 65 odd years from that first picture, and the addition of 2 therapies and some technologies. The therapies that we're familiar with for immune suppression. And it's really disappointing that since belatacept was marketed, there's really been nothing else. The prophylactic agents have contributed enormously to the outcome of transplantation, and it's very hard to pull it apart from the immunosuppression. But it really is there. The impact of the prophylaxis has allowed us to immunosuppress patients to a far greater degree, and to forget prophylaxis as a critical component of transplantation is to ignore a major opportunity. But like the immunosuppressive medications, the pressure for better and more prophylaxis has not really paralleled the development of the numbers of transplants. And you see the technologies, cross-matching, typing, biopsying, BAMF, Luminex, antibody detection. And I leave on the right for you the tolerance strategies which have advanced, but they haven't given us sufficient capacity to beat the current therapies. And that's the problem for everybody, that the invention of new therapies in transplantation is limited by our current success. The transplantation pipelines need to be put back together again because they all head in the wrong direction. We need a continuous flow of ideas from basic science discovery through preclinical and then early clinical research through to pharmacoeconomic evaluation and utilization. The rush is on for COVID, but not for transplantation. We must do what we can through the field, supporting basic sciences, utilizing the data from autoimmunity, supporting preclinical transplantation, using clinical autoimmunity to define our therapies and develop global cooperative trials in transplantation. And you and Inda, with the volumes you have, are perfectly placed to do good clinical trials, collect the data, and prove what it needs to change your outcomes. Prophylaxis would be a very good place to start. In America, in many other countries, there's this myth of personalized medicine, and it's mostly based about making you look pretty with a mythical treatment. We all know that there are new personalized therapies coming along which will improve the technologies we have today, and the next one that is basically just coming to market now is around the possibility of using genetic material, genes, to identify what is happening in a kidney better than and before histology, and to personalize treatment. But beware the marketing of false claims of personalized solutions. And you all know that you have seen this not only in America, but at home. I've certainly seen it at home. The myth of marketing is a big pressure in an environment where there's lots of money flying around. So where else should data help us? And that is here in the mortality of our patients. This shows you fairly simply by age the causes of death of our patients, and you will see infection, a pretty rare cause of death of our young patients, but it is a reasonable cause of death in our older patients, and we need to continue to strive to do better to reduce infection risk for our older populations. And so we can resort to these old approaches to understanding disease. This from Robert Rubin, as I'm sure you know, and I'll show you again in a minute, telling you what you might expect and when you might expect it, and therefore what you can do about it to prevent it, to diagnose it, to treat it quickly. A challenge for all of us. Here I present you a little challenge that we had. The lady on the left presented with E. coli septicemia and was treated. She had a chest x-ray. 1 week later, she presented extremely short of breath and had terrible blood gases and this chest x-ray. And most of you will look at that and go, opportunistic infection, pneumocystis, Legionella, could be something else. It was pneumocystis. And she was the first case. She died. You can see the first case up there. And we very soon, actually, while she was still in the intensive care unit, we got a second case. We hadn't seen pneumocystis for 20 years in the unit because our prophylaxis regime was there. These patients were later after the transplant. They were not on prophylaxis. But we didn't expect the second patient to get disease. And then a few weeks later, the third case turned up, and we suddenly went, this is ridiculous. 3 cases of pneumocystis. Something different is happening here. And we then went back and looked, and each of those dots is a point at which individuals met each other in our outpatient clinics. And you can see they're all connected. And we had a string of 14 cases of pneumocystis over a short period of time before we were able to get control of the disease. We looked at the genotype of the pneumocystis, and it basically all turned out to be the same organism transmitting between our patients. It's not supposed to be like that, but actually it is. It was a cluster, and then when you look across the world, you will see outbreaks like ours. Quite disturbing. What do you need to do about it? What we did was we recognized it, and we put every single patient we had on a year of prophylaxis, inverted commas, with cotrimoxazole or with dapsone pyrimethamine. And then we identified the risk factors for those particular patients, which were poor renal function, recent episode of treated rejection, and poor chronic lung disease. And we went to selective prophylaxis for those who had those risk factors. We allowed everybody else to come off at the end of their year. And what happened? We got a second epidemic. 8 more cases. So all of our patients have gone on universal prophylaxis for life. We have assumed that we have a particularly virulent strain of pneumocystis that is transmitting from patient to patient, and we have to keep the prophylaxis up. Ever vigilant about change in the organisms that confront us. There are many, as you know. Viruses are a real nuisance. We'll talk a little bit about them. Valaciclovir prophylaxis. We need to rely on it. And I know it's expensive. Would you pay for it from your own pocket if you were seropositive, receiving a seropositive kidney? Probably not. But you would improve your results if you did. Would you do it if you were seronegative and receiving a seropositive kidney? Absolutely, you should. Look at this reduction. How long should you take it for? More than 100 days, because if you stop at 100 days, you will get a recrudescence of disease. About 15 to 20% of patients who stop will then get their CMV. And I know that you struggle with CMV in your populations. Not a cheap solution. I absolutely understand that. Better with Indian generic therapies available, but still expensive. But my point, you have to keep monitoring the data to understand what is happening in your disease population and which patients at which risk you should be treating. BK virus nephropathy, an absolute pain in the neck for us. 5 to 6% of our patients were losing kidneys in the late 2000s from BK virus nephropathy, probably due to over-immunosuppression. We got 6% nephropathy, 13% viremia, and 29% decoy cells, pretty much similar to these data from Hans Hirsch. Watching cancer and understanding that that is also related to viral disease. The increased risk of cancer is restricted to the viruses that are oncogenic, are the cancers that have an oncogenic virus origin. And you will look at me and say, we don't get an awful lot of cancer, Dr. Chapman. I don't really worry about it. And I'm just about to show you why. But if patients do get it, their mortality rates compared to non-transplant patients with cancer and compared with transplant patients with no cancer are much, much, much worse. So keeping an eye on that data. Why don't you see it? What is the average length of follow-up of your population post-transplant? Because while the largest number of patients that you follow are within 1 to 5 years of a transplant, you will be down here where the green and purple lines are pretty much together, where the incidence of cancer is not that different. It's only as you get between 5 and 10 years that the cancer rates accelerate. And when you get up to 30 years, nearly half your patients will be dying of cancer. I know that SARS is a particular issue that you will be covering. We have had a completely different experience to India, and I hold out my heart to you as you struggle with the disease that you have around you. A massive problem for India. Predicted, I was sitting in Chennai just at the start of March, discussing with some of your colleagues, mostly in the liver field, where SARS-CoV-2 was in India. And the prediction was that it would eventually cause massive disruption to your country. And I know that it is. What will it do to the kidney? This is a study that was undertaken prior to, after the first SARS epidemic, and demonstrated the coronavirus propensity for the ACE2 protein and its presence around the human body. And I've highlighted for you there the presence in the kidney. What is that doing? Early data looking at the post-mortem findings of patients with COVID-19 demonstrated true infection of the kidney, and indeed acute kidney injury, not just due to the problems of acute tubular necrosis, have plagued sick patients with COVID-19, as you know. In New York, in the large hospitals in New York, quite a number of patients have developed dialysis dependence with SARS-CoV-2, and none of them have come off dialysis. So my prediction is that you are going to see a renal legacy of CKD5 from SARS. I just don't know how big that legacy will be. So while we in the West comfortably sit with our prophylaxis and our infection risks, looking not that much different to this picture, you will tell me Indian clinical practice doesn't look like this. And I know that, and I understand it. Sitting in Delhi with 6 or 7 of the larger academic transplant programs, each sharing their data, each demonstrating that 60% of all transplant deaths are due to infection in India. I know that you have other problems, diabetes, adherence to medication, some optimistic views of the efficacy of alternative therapies, but really, infection is your problem. Bacteria, mycobacteria, fungus disease. I've seen some of the worst fungal infection in patients in India that I've ever seen in my clinical practice. You know that you're struggling, or your patients are struggling with infection more than most of the other things I'm talking about. And that is leading you down different paths. Let me encourage you to use data, to use clinical trial, clinical experiment to reduce these infectious diseases, to consider how best to select, to reduce donor transmission, to prevent disease. Where is the clinical trial on how best to prevent post-transplant mycobacteria? We need it. I know there's a big clinical practice, but you can't tell me clearly whether I should use a year of isoniazid or 6 months of full treatment or continuous treatment or pre-treat. Everybody has their views, but data will change your practice. You have this old, I know, George T. John, now in Melbourne, then in Chennai, Vellore, looking at the facts. Data helps you change what you do with your treatment. And so I'd like to leave you with the view of Dr. V.N. Acharya, raising awareness of the kidney, of diseases of the kidney, of prevention and of treatment. And I would suggest to you that raising awareness is a very good thing to take away from this talk. Please raise awareness with data. It is so much stronger than anything else you have in your armamentarium. I wish I were with you. I hope that I will be able to come back to India and visit you again. I have left some of India for the future to visit, and I look forward to that time. Thank you for the honor of being able to give this oration.
Thank you, Dr. Jeremy Chapman, for accepting our invitation for the Dr. V.N. Acharya Oration. It was indeed our pleasure. And I thank you on behalf of Indian Society of Nephrology West Zone Chapter and its members for the valuable information. We would now like to present to you our memento, thanking you. And I know we couldn't present this to you in person, but we will be sending this across to you, to your office, for as a thanking note. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chapman and the chairpersons. The next talk for today is how to use evidence-based medicines with experience while treating patients. To deliver the talk, we have Dr. Mohan Rajapurkar with us. The session will be chaired by Dr. Umapati Hegde and Dr. Niranjan Ambekar. Dr. Hegde is Vice Chairman, Department of Nephrology at MPUS Nadia. He is Chairman, Scientific Committee for the ongoing ISN West Zone and he has multiple national and international publications to his credit. Dr. Ambekar is a consultant nephrologist with Sasun Hospital Pune and Pune Hospital Pune. He has been an organizing secretary for ISM West Zone 2018. I will request the chairpersons to kindly introduce Dr. Rajapurkar. Over to the chairpersons.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Dr. N.C. Ambekar. Am I audible?
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
So I thank the organizers for inviting us as chairpersons. It's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Rajapurkar. Dr. M.M. Rajapurkar is a stalwart of nephrology all over India. He has been honored with the prestigious Dr. V.C. Roy Award. He has been the president of the Indian Society of Nephrology, also and he has started the renal registry, which is a big thing and a big honor. I request Dr. Umapati Hegde to talk about the topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ambekar. And it is indeed a great pleasure to already it has been introduced by Dr. Ambekar. The guideline is the roadmap, but again, it is always not possible to follow the guidelines because of the patients and also the expertise of the treating hospital or the availability of the material. So Dr. Rajapurkar has been a part of multiple committees for writing the guidelines, and he has a vast experience. So today he is a teacher of teachers, and he is the right person to deliver how to use the evidence-based medicine with expertise while treating patients. Thank you, Dr. Rajapurkar. Please take over and guide us.
Let me share my screen. Let me say thank you very much for asking me to be a part of this. And I thank both Umapati as well as Dr. Bharat Shah to give me this topic, because I don't think I have something which I can tell you which is something world beating. I was told how to use evidence-based medicine with experience while treating patients. I was being generously helped by two of my senior residents, Dr. Mahesh Desai and Abhishek Kadam. How do I move this one? So I bring greetings and best wishes from my team for the best of health of you and your family. I could finish this lecture in one sentence and say that experience does not alter the way you utilize any guideline for treating patients, because evidence is the most important thing in today's world and not eminence. When I was training, maybe if somebody who was even just 6 months senior to you and said, well, in my experience, it is much better. And that trend still continues, that people tend to call their 6 month senior also sir. I've tried to tell my residents and my colleagues to call me by name, but even Umapati hasn't changed on that. And today he is much better in terms of reading than, so certainly we must go with evidence and not by eminence, which can make huge mistakes. So what then is this experience? Now, in an ordinary language, the word experience, this I've taken from the Wikipedia. The word experience may instead sometimes be referred to one's level of competence or expertise, either in general or confined to a particular subject. In this sense of the word, experience generally refers to know-how rather than propositional knowledge, or in other words, on-job training rather than book learning. This article is not about experience and all that. That is what experience is, which means that if